The stars outside the viewport looked cold and distant. Grace Holloway stood at the window of the cargo bay, watching them flicker like dying candles. She had been traveling through space for almost 2 years now, but she never got tired of looking at the stars. They reminded her of the night sky back home in Montana, where the nearest neighbor lived 20 miles away, and the only sounds at night were coyotes and wind. The freighter she worked on was called the Dusty Road. It was not a beautiful ship. The hull was patched in 6 places. The engines made strange noises when they started up, and the heating system only worked on half the decks. But it was home now, and the crew was family. Captain Lucy Marsh was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a voice that could cut through steel. She had hired Grace 3 years ago at a fuel station near Jupiter, back when Grace was still trying to figure out what to do with her life after leaving Earth. The captain saw something in her, she said. Something solid. Now that solid feeling was being tested. The Dusty Road had run into trouble near the border of Therian space. A fuel leak had drained their reserves, and they had been forced to dock at a Dominion station to refuel. The problem was that they did not have enough credits to pay for the fuel. The Therians did not accept promises or delayed payments. They only accepted results. Commander Veyrak of the Therian Dominion was not a patient creature. He stood over 8 feet tall, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that never seemed to blink. His body was built for war, with thick arms and claws that could tear through metal. He had conquered 17 worlds in his career, and he ruled this sector of space with absolute authority. When the crew of the Dusty Road was brought before him, he looked at them the way a cat looks at mice. "You come to my station," he said, his voice deep and cold. "You take my fuel. And you have nothing to offer in return." Captain Marsh stood at the front of the group. She was not afraid, or at least she did not show it. "We can work off the debt," she said. "We're haulers. Give us a job, and we'll pay what we owe." Veyrak made a sound that might have been laughter. It was hard to tell with Therians. "Work? What work could creatures like you possibly do? You are soft. You are weak. Your bones would break under proper gravity. Your skin burns under proper sunlight. You are from a Class 1-2 Deathworld. Yet you move through the galaxy like frightened prey animals." Grace listened quietly. She had heard this kind of talk before. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were fragile. They looked at human skin and saw something that could be cut easily. They looked at human bodies and saw something that could be broken. They did not understand what it took to survive on Earth. "There is one task," Veyrak continued. "One job that might clear your debt. But it is not a job for weaklings." He waved his claw, and a holographic image appeared in the center of the room. It showed a barren moon with a cracked surface and an atmosphere that looked like poison. The image zoomed in on a creature that made Grace's stomach tighten. It was massive, at least 40 meters long, with armored scales and spines that dripped with something wet and green. Its mouth was filled with teeth, the size of swords. "The Vorn Leviathan," Veyrak said. "It nests on the moon of Korath 9. For 3 cycles, I have sent my finest soldiers to kill it. They have all failed. Hundreds of warriors, dead. The creature is too fast, too strong, too smart." Captain Marsh frowned. "You want us to kill that thing?" "I want someone to kill it," Veyrak said. "Anyone. I do not care who. But until the beast is dead, your ship stays here. Your crew stays here. And if you try to leave, I will destroy you." There was silence in the room. Grace could feel the fear coming off her crewmates. Danny Chen, the young engineer, was shaking. Old Pete, the mechanic, had gone pale. Even Captain Marsh looked uncertain. Grace stepped forward. Everyone turned to look at her. She was not the biggest person in the room. She was not the loudest. She was just a woman in her early 30s with brown hair tied back in a ponytail and hands that were rough from years of hard work. But there was something in her eyes that made people pay attention. "I'll do it," she said. Veyrak looked down at her. His eyes narrowed. "You? A single human female?" "Yes." The Therian commander studied her for a long moment. Then he made that strange laughing sound again. "Very well. But first, you must prove you are worthy of the attempt. Survive 1 hour on the surface of Korath 9. If you can do that, I will give you the chance to hunt the beast. Grace nodded. Fine. Captain Marsh grabbed her arm. Grace, this is crazy. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Grace said quietly. They'll hold us here forever if someone doesn't try. And you know none of those soldiers are built for that kind of planet. I am. It was true. Grace had grown up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. She had survived winters that dropped to 40 below zero. She had been thrown from horses, attacked by mountain lions, and caught in flash floods. She had broken bones and kept working. She had buried friends and kept living. Earth was a hard world. It did not forgive weakness, and it had made Grace into something that the galaxy did not understand yet. Veyrak arranged for a shuttle to take her down to the moon's surface. As Grace walked toward the landing bay, she could feel everyone watching her. Some of them thought she was brave, some of them thought she was stupid. Maybe she was both. She stopped at the airlock and looked back at her crew. Captain Marsh had tears in her eyes, though she was trying to hide them. Danny gave her a weak thumbs up. Old Pete just nodded once, slowly. Grace smiled. Don't worry, she said. I've seen worse. Then the airlock closed, and she was gone. The shuttle dropped through the atmosphere of Korath 9 like a stone falling through water. Grace sat alone in the cargo hold, her hands steady on her knees. The pilot was a Therian soldier who had not said a single word to her since they left the station. He probably thought she was already dead. The landing was rough. The shuttle hit the ground hard, and Grace had to grab the wall to keep from falling. Then, the rear hatch opened, and she got her first real look at the moon. It was beautiful in a terrible way. The sky was the color of rust, filled with clouds that moved too fast and looked too heavy. The ground was black volcanic rock, sharp and broken, stretching out in every direction like a frozen sea of knives. In the distance, she could see geysers shooting jets of yellow gas into the air. The air itself smelled like sulfur and metal. The gravity hit her immediately. It was heavy, much heavier than Earth. Each step felt like she was carrying an extra person on her back. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned, but she had worked through worse pain before. 1 hour, the pilot's voice crackled through her helmet radio. If you survive, I will return. If you die, I will not. The shuttle lifted off and disappeared into the rusty sky. Grace was alone. She took a moment to look around and get her bearings. The survival suit they had given her was basic, just enough to keep out the toxic atmosphere and regulate her temperature. She had a small pack with water and rations, and she had her grandfather's knife, the one he had given her when she turned 16. It was old and simple, but the blade was still sharp. The first creature attacked within 10 minutes. It came out of a crack in the rocks, moving fast and low. It looked like a cross between a spider and a lizard, with 8 legs and a body covered in black spines. Its mouth was a circle of teeth that spun like a drill. Grace did not run. Running was a mistake. Instead, she waited until the creature was close, then stepped to the side and brought her knife down hard on the back of its head. The blade went through the soft spot between its armor plates, and the thing dropped to the ground. Twitching, she pulled her knife free and kept walking. The second creature was bigger, about the size of a dog. It tried to ambush her from above, jumping down from a rock formation. But Grace had been watching the shadows, and she was ready. She ducked under its leap, grabbed one of its legs, and used its own momentum to slam it into the ground. Then she finished it with the knife. After that, the other creatures seemed to keep their distance. Maybe they could sense that she was not easy prey. Or maybe they were just waiting for a better opportunity. Grace walked for hours, much longer than the 1 hour she had promised. She was looking for something specific, something she had seen in the holographic images on the station. The Vorn Leviathan's territory. She found signs of it near a large crater filled with bubbling mud. The ground was marked with deep grooves, like something massive had been dragging itself across the rocks. There were bones scattered everywhere, bones from creatures she did not recognize. Some of them were huge, Some of them looked almost fresh. Grace crouched behind a boulder and watched. She did not have to wait long. The Vorn Leviathan emerged from a cave on the far side of the crater. It was even bigger than she had expected. 40 meters long. Maybe more. With scales that looked like they were made of metal. Its eyes were small and dark, set deep in a head that was mostly mouth. The spines along its back dripped with something that sizzled when it hit the ground. It moved slowly, confidently, like a creature that had never known fear. It walked to the edge of the mud pool and began to drink, its long tongue lapping at the bubbling surface. Grace watched for a long time. She studied the way it moved, the way it held its body, the way its eyes tracked movement. She noticed that it favored its left side, like maybe an old injury had healed wrong. She noticed that it did not look up very often, like it was not used to threats coming from above. She memorized everything. When the creature finished drinking, it turned and crawled back into its cave. Grace waited another hour to make sure it was really gone. Then she carefully made her way back across the moon's surface, following the trail she had left in the volcanic dust. The shuttle returned exactly when the pilot had said it would. The Therian looked surprised to see her standing there, alive and uninjured. "You survived," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Grace said simply. The flight back to the station was quiet. Grace sat in the cargo hold and closed her eyes. She was tired, bone-deep tired. But her mind was still working. She was already planning. When they docked, Commander Veyrak was waiting for her. His soldiers stood behind him in perfect rows, their weapons ready. The commander looked at Grace like she was a puzzle he could not solve. 72 hours, he said. "You were on the surface for 72 hours. "I lost track of time," Grace said. "You were supposed to survive 1 hour. That was the challenge." "I know. But I wanted to see what I was dealing with." Veyrak stepped closer. He was so tall that Grace had to crane her neck to look at his face. His breath smelled like copper and ash. "You found the beast," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. And you did not run." "No." The commander was silent for a long moment. His claws clicked together slowly, the way a human might tap their fingers when they were thinking. "How did you survive so long?" he finally asked. "My soldiers cannot last 1 hour on that moon. The gravity crushes them. The atmosphere poisons them. The creatures hunt them. Yet you walked for 3 days like it was nothing." Grace shrugged. "Where I come from, we call that Tuesday." Veyrak made that strange laughing sound again, but this time there was something different in it. Something that might have been respect. "Very well, human," he said. "You have proven yourself worthy. Now let us discuss terms." Grace nodded. She had passed the first test. But the real challenge was still waiting for her, deep in a cave on a moon made of nightmares. And she was going to need help. The meeting took place in Veyrak's private chambers, a room filled with trophies from his many conquests. There were skulls mounted on the walls, weapons displayed in glass cases, and flags from planets that no longer existed. It was meant to intimidate visitors. Grace ignored all of it. She sat across from the commander at a table made of dark stone. Her crew was still being held in the station's detention area, but Captain Marsh had been allowed to join the meeting as a witness. The captain stood by the door, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Here is my offer," Veyrak said, leaning forward on his massive claws. "Kill the Vorn Leviathan, and I will release your crew. I will clear your fuel debt, and I will grant you free passage through Dominion space for the rest of your lives. No fees, no inspections, no questions." Grace nodded slowly. "And if I fail, then you will die on that moon, and your crew will work in my mines until they pay their debt. Which, given their fragile nature, will probably not be very long." Captain Marsh made a sound of protest, but Grace raised her hand slightly, and the captain fell silent. "I accept," Grace said. "But I have conditions." Veyrak's eyes narrowed. "Conditions? You are in no position to make demands, human. Maybe not. But you've sent hundreds of soldiers to kill that thing, and they all failed. So either you let me do this my way, or you keep losing people until there's no one left to send." The commander was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured with one claw. "Speak." Grace had thought about this carefully during her time on the moon's surface. She knew what she needed, and she knew how to ask for it. "First, I need time. Not hours. Weeks. Maybe a month." "A month?" Veyrak sounded almost offended. "My soldiers attacked the beast within hours of landing, and they're all dead. I need to prepare." The commander grunted but did not argue. "Second, I need materials. Metal, explosives, tools. I'll give you a list. Explosives will not kill the Leviathan. Its scales are too strong. I'm not going to throw explosives at it. I'm going to use them differently." Veyrak studied her with those unblinking eyes. "And your third condition?" This was the tricky part. Grace had noticed something during her time on the station. Something that had stayed in her mind even while she was fighting for her life on the moon below. "I want a partner. Someone from your people to help me." "A Therian soldier?" Veyrak seemed confused. "They will die within minutes on that surface." "Not a soldier. A scout named Selith." The change in Veyrak's expression was immediate. His scales seemed to darken, and his claws dug grooves into the stone table. "Selith," he repeated. "You want the coward. I want the smart one." Grace had seen Selith on her first day at the station. He was young for a Therian, smaller than the others, with scales that were more green than red. While the soldiers had looked at the human prisoners with contempt, Selith had brought them water and blankets. When Grace had asked him why, he had simply said, "Because you looked cold." Later, she had learned his story. Selith had been a promising scout, one of the best trackers in the Dominion, but during a campaign on a frontier world, he had refused to execute prisoners after a battle. He had said it was unnecessary. He had said it was wrong. For that, he had been stripped of his rank and assigned to the lowest duties on the station. The other Therians called him a disgrace. But Grace had seen something in his eyes that the others had missed. She had seen someone who could think for himself. "Selith is weak," Veyrak said. "He does not have the stomach for war. I don't need someone with a stomach for war. I need someone who can track, someone who can think, and someone who won't panic when things go wrong." The commander made a sound of disgust. "If you want to waste your time with that failure, so be it. He is worthless to me anyway." Grace nodded. "Then we have a deal?" Veyrak stood up, his massive form blocking out the light from the ceiling panels. "We have a deal, human. But understand this. If you fail, there will be no rescue. There will be no second chance. You will die on that moon, and no one will remember your name." Grace stood up too, her head barely reaching his chest. "Fair enough." The preparations took 3 weeks. Grace worked day and night, gathering materials, building equipment, and planning every detail of the hunt. She drew maps from memory, calculating distances and angles. She built traps from salvaged metal. She tested explosives in the station's waste disposal area, much to the annoyance of the maintenance crews. Selith was with her every step of the way. At first, he was nervous and uncertain, clearly uncomfortable being around a human. But Grace was patient with him. She taught him how to read animal behavior, how to predict movement patterns, how to use the environment as a weapon. "On my world," she told him one night as they worked on a trigger mechanism, "we have creatures called grizzly bears. They're massive, strong enough to tear a person apart with one swipe. But the people who live near them learn to survive, not by fighting the bears head-on, but by understanding them." Selith listened carefully. "How do you understand something that wants to kill you? You watch. You learn. You find the patterns. Every creature has habits, weaknesses, blind spots. Even the Leviathan." Selith thought about this. "The Dominion way is to attack with overwhelming force, to crush the enemy before they can react. That works against enemies who are weaker than you. But what happens when you meet something stronger?" The young Therian did not have an answer. Grace smiled and handed him a piece of wire. "You learn to be smarter." On the last night before they left for Korath 9, Captain Marsh came to see Grace in her quarters. The captain looked older than she had 3 weeks ago, worn down by worry and waiting. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Grace was packing her supplies, checking each item twice. "No, but I'm going anyway. That thing has killed hundreds of trained warriors. You're just one person." "I know." Grace looked up at her captain. Her friend. "But sometimes one person is all you need. Especially if that person is too stubborn to die." Captain Marsh laughed, though there were tears in her eyes. "You're crazy, you know that?" "I've been told." They hugged, holding each other tight for a long moment. Then Grace picked up her pack and walked toward the shuttle bay, where Seleth was already waiting. The hunt was about to begin. The volcanic shelf overlooking the feeding pool had become their home for the past 12 days. Grace and Seleth had built a small shelter in a crevice between two massive boulders, hidden from the Leviathan's view but close enough to watch its every move. The gravity was crushing. Even with the enhanced suit that Grace had modified, every movement felt like wading through thick mud. Seleth suffered even more. Therians were not built for heavy gravity, and the young scout had to rest frequently, his breathing labored and his scales turning pale. But he never complained. Not once. They had watched the Leviathan for days, tracking its patterns with careful precision. Grace had been right about the creature. It was a beast of habit. Every morning, as the rust-colored sun rose over the horizon, the Leviathan emerged from its cave. It walked the same path to the feeding pool. It drank for exactly the same amount of time. Then, it hunted in the same territory before returning to its lair. "It's like a machine," Seleth whispered one night, studying the notes they had made. Grace shook her head. "No. It's like an old bull. It's been the biggest, meanest thing on this moon for so long that it's forgotten how to be careful. It doesn't think anything can hurt it. Can we? We're about to find out." The plan was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Grace had identified a weakness in the terrain near the feeding pool. The volcanic rock there was thin, hollowed out by centuries of gas vents and erosion. Beneath the surface was a network of tunnels filled with toxic gases, the same gases that the Leviathan instinctively avoided. If they could collapse the ground at the right moment, they could drop the creature into a pit of poison. It would not matter how strong its scales were. Nothing could survive those fumes for long. The tricky part was getting the Leviathan to stand in exactly the right spot, at exactly the right time. That was where Grace came in. "You want to use yourself as bait," Seleth said, his voice flat with disbelief. "That's insane. It's the only way. The Leviathan charges at threats. It doesn't think. It just attacks. If I can get its attention and make it chase me to the right spot, you can trigger the explosives. And if it catches you before you reach the spot," Grace smiled grimly, "then you trigger the explosives anyway." Seleth's eyes widened. "I can't do that. I can't kill you." "You can. And you will. If that thing survives, it won't stop at me. It'll hunt you down next. And then it'll keep killing, and my crew will never go free." Grace put her hand on the young Therian's shoulder. "This is bigger than me, Seleth. You understand that, right?" Seleth was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand." They set the explosives over the next 2 days, working in shifts while the Leviathan slept. It was delicate work, planting charges in precise locations, connecting them with wires that had to be buried under the volcanic dust. One mistake, one misplaced step, and the whole plan would fail. But Grace had spent her whole life doing precise work under pressure, fixing fences in blizzards, pulling calves during difficult births, tracking wolves through mountain forests. This was just another job, another problem to be solved with patience and skill. On the morning of the 13th day, everything was ready. Grace stood on the rock outcropping overlooking the feeding pool. She was wearing every piece of protective gear she had, but she knew it would not save her if the Leviathan got close. Her only protection was speed and timing. The sun rose, the clouds parted, and the Vorn Leviathan emerged from its cave. It was even more terrifying in the morning light. Its scales gleamed like dark metal, and its spines left trails of venom in the air. It moved with the confidence of a creature that had never known defeat, never experienced fear, never even considered the possibility that something might be stronger. Grace watched it walk toward the pool. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She had done this before, in a different form. She had faced charging bulls and angry stallions. She had stood her ground when every instinct screamed at her to run. The Leviathan reached the pool and began to drink. Grace picked up a rock and threw it. The stone bounced off the creature's back with a sharp crack. The Leviathan's head snapped up, its small, dark eyes scanning the area. For a moment, it seemed confused. Nothing had ever dared to challenge it before. Grace threw another rock, harder this time. The second stone hit the creature directly on the nose. The Leviathan roared, a sound so loud and deep that Grace felt it in her bones. Then it turned and saw her standing on the outcropping, small and exposed and utterly insignificant. It charged. Grace ran. The Leviathan was fast, faster than anything that size should be. Its massive legs tore up the volcanic rock as it sprinted toward her, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of sword-like teeth. The ground shook with every step. Grace did not look back. She focused on the path ahead, on the markers she had placed to guide her. 50 meters, 40, 30, the creature was gaining. She could feel its hot breath on her back, could smell the venom dripping from its spines. 20 meters, 10. She reached the target zone and kept running, leaping over a small boulder and throwing herself into a narrow crevice on the other side. Now, she screamed. Seleth pressed the trigger. The world exploded. The volcanic shelf collapsed inward, taking the Leviathan with it. The creature roared in surprise and fury as the ground disappeared beneath its feet. It tried to scramble for purchase, its claws tearing at the crumbling rock, but there was nothing to hold on to. It fell. The Leviathan crashed into the pit below, into the network of tunnels filled with toxic gas. Its roars turned to choking sounds as the poison filled its lungs. It thrashed and struggled, its massive body breaking apart the tunnel walls, but that only released more gas. Grace pulled herself out of the crevice and crawled to the edge of the new crater. She looked down and watched the Leviathan die. It took a long time. The creature was strong, stronger than anything she had ever seen. But even it could not survive without air. Slowly, its movements weakened. Its roars became whimpers. And then, finally, it was still. Seleth appeared beside her, his legs trembling, his eyes wide with shock. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." Grace sat back on the volcanic rock, exhausted beyond words. Her whole body ached, her lungs burned. But she was alive. "We did it," she corrected him. Together, she looked up at the rust-colored sky and thought about Montana, about the ranch, about her grandfather, who had taught her to never give up, no matter how bad things got. "Thanks, old man," she whispered. I remembered. The shuttle ride back to the station was quiet. Grace sat in the cargo hold with her eyes closed, too tired to move, too tired to think. Seleth sat across from her, still processing what they had done. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. When the shuttle docked, the airlock opened to reveal a crowd. Hundreds of Therians had gathered in the landing bay, their scales gleaming under the harsh lights. They stood in perfect silence, watching as Grace and Seleth stepped off the shuttle. For a moment, Grace thought they might be there to arrest her. Maybe Veyrak had changed his mind. Maybe the whole thing had been a trick. Then the crowd parted, and Commander Veyrak walked through. He stopped in front of Grace and looked down at her with those unblinking eyes. His expression was impossible to read. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Then Veyrak did something that made everyone in the room gasp. He bowed. It was not a deep bow, not the kind a servant might give to a master. It was the bow of one warrior to another, the acknowledgement of an equal. Coming from a Therian commander. It was almost unheard of. "The beast is dead," Veyrak said, straightening up. "My scouts confirmed it. The Vorn Leviathan, killer of armies, has fallen to a single human and a disgraced scout." Grace said nothing. She was too exhausted for speeches. "I am a creature of my word," Veyrak continued. "Your debt is cleared. Your crew is free, and you have earned safe passage through Dominion space for as long as you live." He paused, and something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "I underestimated you, human. I will not make that mistake again." Grace nodded slowly. "Thank you. Do not thank me. You earned this. Every bit of it." Veyrak turned to look at Seleth, who was standing quietly behind Grace. "And you. The coward who refused to execute prisoners. The failure who was not fit to serve in my army." Seleth flinched but did not look away. "You helped kill the unkillable beast," Veyrak said. "Perhaps I was wrong about you as well." Then the commander turned and walked away, his soldiers falling into formation behind him. The crowd began to disperse, but many of them lingered, staring at Grace with expressions she could not quite understand. Some looked afraid, some looked curious, a few looked almost hopeful. Captain Marsh pushed through the crowd and grabbed Grace in a crushing hug. "You crazy, beautiful idiot," she said, her voice muffled against Grace's shoulder. "You actually did it." "I had help," Grace said, looking back at Seleth. The young Therian shifted uncomfortably under the attention. He was not used to being looked at with anything other than contempt. Old Pete was next, slapping Grace on the back with his weathered hands. Danny Chen was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. The whole crew of the dusty road surrounded her, laughing and weeping and asking questions all at once. Grace let herself be carried along by their joy. For a few minutes, she forgot about the pain in her muscles and the burns on her skin. She forgot about the nightmares she would probably have for years. She just let herself be happy. But the story did not end there. Word spread fast. In a galaxy connected by faster-than-light communication, news of the Leviathan's death reached distant systems within hours. People started talking. Other species started asking questions. Who were these humans? Where did they come from? How had one of them, a simple freighter worker with no military training, accomplished what entire armies could not? The answers were unsettling. Humans came from Earth, a Class 1-2 Deathworld, where the gravity was crushing, the weather was deadly, and almost every creature was either venomous, aggressive, or both. Humans had evolved not to be the strongest or the fastest, but to be the most stubborn. They could survive almost anything. They could adapt to almost any environment, and when they set their minds to something, they simply refused to give up. Within weeks, diplomatic channels were buzzing with requests for information about humanity. Within months, trade delegations were arriving at Earth's colonies, offering partnerships and alliances. The galaxy had overlooked the small blue planet for too long. Now they were paying attention. Grace did not care about any of that. She just wanted to go home. The dusty road left the Therian station 3 days after the hunt, its fuel tanks full and its crew intact. Captain Marsh set a course for the nearest human colony, where they could rest and resupply before continuing their journey. But there was one new addition to the crew. Seleth had asked to come with them. He said he wanted to learn more about humans, to understand how they thought and lived and survived. But Grace suspected there was more to it than that. He had tasted something on Korath 9, something he had never experienced before. Victory. Belonging. Purpose. She agreed to take him on one condition. "You have to learn to cook," she said. Seleth blinked in confusion. "Cook? Why?" "Because if you're going to live on my ship, you're going to pull your weight. And right now, the only person who cooks is Pete. And honestly, his food is terrible." Old Pete made a sound of protest from across the cargo bay. "Fine," Seleth said. "I will learn to cook." And he did. Badly, at first. His first attempt at making pancakes nearly set the kitchen on fire. But he kept trying. The same way Grace had taught him to keep trying during the hunt. Eventually, he got better. Not good, but better. On the last night before they reached the colony, Grace stood at the viewport in the cargo bay, watching the stars drift by. Seleth joined her, holding 2 cups of something that might have been coffee if you squinted hard enough. Do you ever think about what happens next? He asked. Next? The galaxy knows about humans now. They know you come from a death world. They know you can do things that other species cannot. Some will want to be your allies. Others will want to destroy you before you become a threat. Grace took one of the cups and sipped from it. It was terrible. She drank it anyway. I know, she said. But that's tomorrow's problem. Right now, I'm just a hauler trying to get home. You're more than that. You changed things. The galaxy will never look at your species the same way again. Grace smiled, her eyes still fixed on the stars. Maybe. But I didn't do it for the galaxy. I did it for my crew. For my friends. For the people who needed me. Seleth was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, understanding. Far away, on a Therian station, Commander Veyrak sat in his observation deck, watching the stars. On his desk was a file, newly created and marked with the highest security classification. It was labeled simply, Earth Threat Assessment, Revised. He opened it and began to read. And somewhere in the back of his ancient warrior mind, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Respect. And just a little bit of fear.